I'm going to start the way I started with everybody, which is to ask you
That's fair.
your your name, rank, and your serial number.
Edward Segall. Oh, you're asking me to think of my serial. 697-6233, Staff Sergeant.
Thanks. And where were you born and raised?
Brooklyn, New York.
And tell me a little bit about that. What was it like growing up in Brooklyn?
Well, as I mentioned before, I was born in a family of 7 adults, and more or less was on my own most of the time. I used to build canoes, put them in Gravesend Bay, and row around out of canvas and wood. And I sort of liked the outdoors and look for things in the outdoors, catching snakes on railroad tracks on Stillwell Avenue. And as for school, if my parents were preoccupied elsewhere, and I more or less went on my own and made several mistakes. But thank God I got through with that. And I went to Brooklyn Automotive because I had met the pilot at Floyd Bennett Airport, who was a teacher there. And he had an old Stinson Reliant. I don't know if you remember those. And he let me help cleaning it and everything else. And we got pretty friendly. And he said, why don't you come to my school? He said, learn about engines and things like that. So that's what I did. Instead of going to a regular high school, I went to Brooklyn Automotive, which entailed taking 2 trains to Manhattan and back to Queens. So it wasn't an easy thing. But I stayed there until the last semester, which was, and I was very unhappy there because the people that they had there were really ignorant, they didn't know, and it bothered me a lot. The last semester was working in an automobile shop, and I certainly didn't want that, where they repaired cars for the public or whoever brought their cars in, and they would work on it. So I didn't go back there. And then I went to work for a lithographing company and worked there for a while. And from there, I went into the service.
So you were kind of like the outdoorsy type, I guess you could say.
Yes.
When you were
Yes. I look for excitement, more or less.
Now that's unique considering you lived in the city.
Well, that's why. That's why I used. Pardon the idea with a BB gun. I used to hunt rats at the local lots out there. But that appealed to me.
It came in handy later, though, as far as marksmanship.
I raised, nothing came in handy later. I raised pigeons, I raised rabbits. My brother worked for Steeplechase. You're familiar with that?
I've heard
Coney Island, and they had this big area with the rides and everything else, and rotating barrels that you walk through. And he worked for a Greek gentleman that had his store in the center of this steeplechase. And through that, he met other people with the shooting galleries. And through them, he got a hexagon 22 rifle, which he kept in the basement, and he didn't know that I knew about it. So I won't go into that. But I was shooting that gun without him knowing it. But you talk about marksmanship. Everything that I was taught about leading that fighter and shooting that fighter down was useless, because in the end result, they came in straight behind us, lined up in a very neat row behind us, twin engine fighters, I think they were ME-410s, and shot us down. Stayed out of range and shot us down. Now, I don't know, there was no fighter escort. It was too far into, it was all the way into the Baltic. But I'm going off course here.
Well, no, it's still a bit,
But everything they taught me about, didn't mean a thing. The reticle in my sight went out when we were hit or something, and all the power went out, and all the radio went out, and the reticle that told me the distance that they were at in my turret went out too. So I just shooting through that ball and whatever they call it, and I didn't know when they were close enough. But when their wings lit up, they were firing at me. So when they lit up, I lit up because I figured maybe they're, that's when they were in range. But they must have been shooting cannon that had a little more range than ours. But I was spraying and spraying and spraying for a long time. They just sitting out there, and plane to the left of me was burning. The tail gun is hanging down like this, so he must have been out of it. But then my pilot was taking evasive action, which don't help you in the turret when you're trying to train on it. But I feel sorry for him. I really do, because they attacked from the rear. He had no way of knowing, but he sees the planes alongside of him burning, and he hears me chattering away with those two grandpa cannons of mine, and I'm firing because I'm spraying high, trying to see if I can get it to come down. But they were out of range, and there was just nothing we could do but get shot down. And I really feel sorry because he didn't know. He hit me on the back of the foot. He reached over from his seat, and I was right behind him in the turret, and he hit me. And I looked down at him, and the place was gray with smoke. And he pulled his oxygen mask off, and he looked ghostly to me. He looked terrified. And he said, "We're going down." So I left the gun. I don't know about the fighters behind me. I left the gun. And I went to him, and he said to the navigator, "Where are we? Are we over land? Are we over water?" Because we were just approaching the German coast. And Hill, in his usual way, "I don't know." He says, with all of this combat and this and that, he'd been following lead planes all the way through, obviously. He says, I don't know. We were approaching land, but I don't know where we are. So he turned to me and he said, tell them to throw everything, tell the guys in the waist to throw everything overboard that's loose, guns, ammunition, everything. Get everything out of the plane that might fly around, and tell them we're ditching because the radio was out. He says, and salvo the bomb, get Muniz to salvo the bombs. So I ran through the waist and I told them, we're ditching everything out of the plane, guns, everything that's loose. Left them, went down to the nose where Muniz was. And I said, salvo the bombs. So he trips the thing and nothing happens. Electrically, everything was electric. And he couldn't even open a bomb bay. So he said, so I ran back up, got my crusty crank, which I had used before in an emergency, and started to crank the bomb bay doors open. And George Roach came by and said, give me a hand here, because we're up at quite an altitude and running around without oxygen. And he started to help me, and we got it open. And I ran back to the bomb. I said, salvo them, the doors are open. He hits it again, nothing. He says, salvo them from the bomb bay. I ran back there again, and I grabbed this, like a shovel handle, and I pull it, and there they go away from me. And I watched them go down into the clouds below us. Then I had to close the bomb bay again, because if we hit anything with the bomb bay open, we're just torn to pieces. So I started cranking again and cranking until I got it shut. And then I went up back to the radio room. And everybody's milling around in the radio room. And I had back in Salt Lake City, I had them out. I was the old soldier, the sergeant. And I had a ditching procedure where everyone was to sit down and place your hands behind the head in front of you. This one had this one, so that your heads were not on a line. And they sat down between your legs, and you just in one line. Everybody sat in one line. And they're milling around. So I sat down, and I reached over and I grabbed the pillow from the radio man seat, and I put it behind my back and put it against the bulkhead of the Bombay. And they all sat down in front of me, except Carl Caputo, the radio man. He was apparently very religious, and he was on his knees, and he was genuflecting and Hail Mary all over the place. And then he finally got into the row. And we went down, and I had the ball turret guy turn his guns straight down so that he could feel the water before he hit. Everything was done properly. And we're just sitting there. He was supposed to set the alarm before we hit. He didn't have any alarm. What happened was there was a layer of fog on the water, and he couldn't see the water either. This poor guy, poor pilot, he really had it. But he was a good pilot and a brave guy. We hit the water with such force, we passed out, and all of the hands went like this, you know. And we got up, and we were standing in a knee-deep in water inside the plane. And yelled out, "Anybody hurt? Anybody hurt?" Carl Caputo had cut across something had come off his frequency modulation things had come off the wall and hit him. And we tried to push somebody out through the radio hatch, but the gun was in there. The gun was still in there, and he couldn't fit through. He could just fit up to his chest. So he came back down, and he said, "How the hell are you going? We can't get out. We can't get out. We're like a bunch of rats in there." And the plane was still sinking, and then it went under with all of us. And I came to again, and I was about 10, 15 feet underwater, which I didn't know at the time. I didn't know which way was up. And I grabbed for my Mae West, and I pulled the string, and it shot up over my head. So this way was up. And I was an excellent swimmer. So even with all that clothes, I kept swimming to the surface, and it finally broke through, air. And there, standing there, is a tail standing out of the water with the elevators just in between the control pod and the rig. And it's just standing there out of the water. And this ammunition box floated by. I grabbed that, and I paddled over to the tail and held on to where the elevator joins in. And I inched and it was like being in this room. Fog so thick you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. And I edged along the tail and looked around the other side, and there two rubber boats. Two boats floating in the water with the pilot and co-pilot. And when the plane had hit, they jumped out of their window, and the co-pilot, Gil, we have Gil and Hill, had a cut above his eye, but he was okay, and he was in. They had run along the top of the plane and pulled the two life rafts free, so they were floating there. And I came out, and they saw me come around and start yelling at me, and I tried to swim over to them, and I got to the boat, and I was hanging on. They said, "Okay, come, get in," and I couldn't. I couldn't move. I was just flat out of it. And they finally dragged me into the boat, and then over to the left, here pops George Roach, pops up in his oily water. He was a mess, and we got him. So we just stood there in the fog. We tied the boats together so that they wouldn't separate, and we're yelling out to anybody that was that might be swimming or out there. We stayed there, and we yelled and we yelled and we yelled. And finally, down the tail, and everything was quiet. So we lost 4 men, and as tragic as that is, we were in a desperate situation, and you try to think to do what am I going to do next, And we had compasses in the boat, little compasses you could put in your mouth. There, and some French money. What are you going to do? What good in the Baltic Sea? But no food, which was stupid. They should have had chocolate bars galore in there or something. And we started to paddle, and we used the compass, and we were going towards the German coast because we knew it was either there or on land, according to what he said. But the fog was so thick you couldn't see anything. And we paddled for about an hour. Then I could hear something like something crashing on the surf. I said, I hope we don't snag anything on the rubber boat, I didn't know what we were into. And we kept paddling, and then a few minutes more later, I see the waves are breaking on shore right there. It was very calm. And we looked, and there on the beach was about 20 feet long, and then after that, the pine trees were 100 feet high, the forest right alongside the beach. And we dragged the boats up on the beach into the forest and turned them both over and made a sort of a tent out of them and lit a fire, burned the damn bottom of our shoes off, trying to keep warm. And the next morning, bright and early, George was up looking for wood, and right behind me comes Handa Huck, hands up. So I said to George, I yelled at George, be careful. And in front of him, another guy comes up, Handa Huck, hands up. So there they were, two Volkssturm, People's Army guys with shotguns. And they picked us up. And we were sort of glad because we were freezing out. And I tell you, in the boat, it was like a motorboat. It was shaking so much from our shaking that our cold. They were all, April in the Baltic is not the nicest place in the world to swim. And they walked us along the beach with our hands up. And I was out of it. I dropped my hands, and then the guy poking me in the back, hand to Huck. I said, screw you, you don't shoot me. And the pilot says, Ed, put your hands up. I says, I'm not going to put my hands up. I can't keep them up. So they all dropped their hands. And we walked that way. And we walked along the beach, and then we came to a little town with an armory. I guess you would call it an armory. It was soldiers there, and they put us in a room, and we were all sitting full of oil and everything. And one of the things that I recall, one of the secretaries, from German secretaries, women came and peeked at us, and she says, Schwarzes, blacks. And we really were covered with all kinds of crap. Well, then they called us into the office one by one, interrogation. This was a major or a colonel, a high-ranking officer, sitting behind his beautiful desk. They called one in, Sergeant Segall. Oh. So I got up, and I had this cup in my hand, the bailing cup, the compasses and money, a little hacksaw, everything. And so I got up and I walked, and this guard walks me in to the office. And as I go in there, I put the cup down outside and I walked in. Unconscious, really unconscious. And he's sitting behind the desk in a beautiful uniform, and he starts asking me questions. 697, 6233, staff sergeant, Segall, United States Air Force, 697. We were taught never to look at them, look above their head. And that just give that answer all the time. He picks up my dog tag and he says, Yud? Jew? I said, Hebrew. It's H. I said, Hebrew. He looked at me and he says, good soldat, Rouse. Good soldier, out. So they weren't all Nazi pricks. Excuse me. But, it was, I never seemed to worry about that thing, even though what was going on there at the time. And then they gave us some potato soup that you wouldn't want to feed to a dog. And they said, we're going to put you in a limousine and take you to the train. You'll be shot if you try to escape. And they had 5 of these goons there guarding us all. We were going anyway. We're just getting something to eat, you know. And the last thing on our mind was escaping. Where the hell were we going to go? We didn't even know where we were. It was the Pomeranian coast there, near Stettin. And I could swear I heard rocket blasting off in the distance. So it must have been near Pananamid at the time. So they put us on this wood-burning limousine bus. And the guards took us to the railroad station and turned us over to, we had one guy go with us. And he got the conductors in Germany. They wore that metal disc around them. They were God. They were God. He went into the train and chased people out of the compartment. He chased them right out. Then it went. And they put us in there. And the guard that was with us, he carried a briefcase with our lunch, black bread and a sausage. That was our lunch. And from there, the train went to Berlin. And they took us off the train and put us on the top of some building during an air raid. And I remember walking through the streets and smelling burnt wood. You know, the smell of there had been a fire. And I could look through the windows and see the sky and everything. So even at that time, they'd been beat up a little bit. And the next day, we were back on the train again to a place they called the Quetschmühle, the squeeze mill. Forget the name of the town again, in southern Germany. And they had this big glass dome over the station with every piece of glass in there broken out. And the civilians were spitting on us and yelling at us because we still had these heated suits with the tails hanging out like monkeys. You know, they knew who we were. And we had heard that they had pushed one of the guys into a train at one time. And they weren't happy with us for what we were doing. They wanted to know why we were bombing them. Idiots. Well, who knows what their propaganda was. But they were very mad at us. And that was the place where they gave you the cigarette. And if you stayed there, that meant you talked too much. And they ship you out. Put us in a 40 and 8 car with straw on the floor. And off we went towards Austria. And they'd stop every once in a while, and it was like the Red Cross, the German Red Cross or whatever, would give us some soup or something until we got to where we were. And we got to Krems. And we got off the train at Krems, and the German officer was yelling and telling us what's going to happen, you know. And they had the dogs there, and the dogs were, they started to fight amongst them other, and this German is yelling, "Verdammte Hund!" and the guy would just twist his hand, and the dog would bite at a stake in the ground. That's how trained they were. Well, what happened was they started to fight, and he tried to break him up, and he got bitten in the arm, you know. And all the guys were all so happy. And the German's officer is screaming at them. He's trying to tell us something, and the dogs are barking out loud and growling and fighting around. And finally, we walked to the prison, Stalag 17, which was already established. It was an old non-commissioned officers prison camp and the Air Force, alongside a double barbed wire fence. On the other side was Russian prisoners of war. And that's how we ended up there.
What was I was going to say, how did you guys? I guess what did you see of the condition of the Russian prisoners? Did you
Very bad, very bad. They had typhus, first of all. So the first thing we told the commandant, we took over we wanted buckets of whitewash. We wanted to clean our barracks. And if he advises, if we get disease, your guards are going to get disease, you're going to get disease. So let's stop this while we can, because it was flea infested. So we got buckets of whitewash and we painted that place down. And much to the amazement of the other prisoners that were already there. And we painted it. On the chimney, we painted it. Air Force signal, a star and a circle. But we painted it. And every day you could see carrying the, like a boot hill in the distance, you could see that they used to have the Russians wrapped in some kind of material and carry them out and bury them out there. They were dying. And, but we never got the sickness. The typhus, they had rats. You could hear them in the roof, And so that was that.
I think I asked you this before, but that story about a couple of guys who took the whitewash paint, I guess, and they somehow managed to paint themselves right out of the camp.
Well, that's Hollywood. That's Hollywood. They did a picture on Stalag 17,
right.
And that never happened.
Yeah, they tried to get with the Russian girls, I guess. They were bringing Russian women in the next...
They were not such gorgeous creatures. What we did start the biggest black market in Vienna with cigarettes, because we used to throw the cigarettes to the Russians, and the guards too. Whenever they wanted to get something, they do something with cigarettes. Were like money, and we never had onions. We were dying for onions, something with a flavor, And we used to throw a package over, and they'd throw onions because they worked on the local farms. We didn't work. We weren't allowed to work, except for digging tunnels.
Freelance work.
Yeah. That place was honeycomb.
I'm going to check really quickly. I guess, is the light still flashing?
Yeah.